Board of Internal Economy in the session, and it'll be televised and video conferenced as well. The minutes of the previous meeting, is there anything arising or anything we're okay with those? We can pass them. Fantastic. Good. Business arising from previous meetings. Nothing to bring up. Oh, Mr. Richards. Mr. Richards, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd taken care of that already. I'm really good at this stuff. Just wanted to touch base on the one item that we had where there was some follow-up required. We had sent a letter, and there was a deadline on that, of the 18th of December, I believe, for a response. Just wondering if we would be looking at maybe scheduling a meeting sometime shortly after that or early in the new year to discuss that item based on any response we receive.
Okay, the letter has been sent. I don't believe we have received a response yet.
No, understood, Mr. Speaker, but we've given a deadline of December the 18th. And so I'm just wondering, there's, if we were planning to schedule a meeting shortly after that to discuss our response based on that.
We'll have to wait till the response comes back. The letter has gone out, and we'll see what happens from there, if that's fair.
Sure. I just guess I was just trying to.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you. No, the letter did go out, and it went out within a couple of days of when we met last, so that it's all taken care of.
Yeah. I guess all I'm getting at there, Mr. Speaker, is just that that leaves a long time between the time that the response would be received, and I just wouldn't want to leave that hanging over anyone for a long period of time. So whether we would, I know we ordinarily wouldn't meet for some time after that. Just wondered if we were giving some consideration to a meeting sooner so that it wouldn't be left hanging.
I think that's fair. I think if it's okay with everyone, what we'll do is we'll wait till the response comes back, and then we'll deal with it when we have the facts in front of us. Is that fair? Okay, that's good. Got consensus around the room. Perfect. And our first presentation this morning is the LTVP Working Group recommendations. The presenter is Mr. Bruce Stanton, the co-chair of Joint Interparliamentary Council and Deputy Speaker par excellence. Mr. Stanton. Oh, oui, m'excuse.
Je m'excuse, je savais pas où vous étiez rendu, c'est parce que
I wasn't sure where you were at. I just would like you to allow me to thank Mr. Jean, who wrote correspondence to us in response to the questions I had asked him and the request I made of him. The answers are about the number of witnesses testifying in French in parliamentary committees to explain and document the fact that technological issues linked to wearing the official headset or other technological difficulties have a real effect on unilingual francophone members. And I thought it was around 90% of witnesses witnesses are giving their testimony in English 90% of the time. It's actually 96% of parliamentary committee witnesses are testifying in English. So we've been saying since the outset that interpretation and technical issues do weigh more heavily on francophone members. I think that this is now well documented. These are facts. Moreover, Chair, there are a number of recommendations and suggestions being made here. For example, to speak to the liaison committee chair to ask her to include a routine motion for all parliamentary committees to the effect that each of these adopt an internal economy motion to the effect that witnesses check the quality of their sound, go through a sound check before they testify. So, does this recommendation, this measure, this suggestion, is this something that will be brought before the House administration and before the clerk, something that would be proposed by the clerk in the House, or is it something that we should speak to? I'd like your advice on that. That's my question. based on this follow-up. And also, I thank the team of clerks who have documented this matter. I think it will be very useful for all our future work. So among the suggestions made, as I say, is this up to us to carry them forward, or will it be the liaison committee with the clerks taking charge of moving this forward, the suggestions in this correspondence, the law clerk? I know it's an important matter for all. Perhaps I will turn this over to Mr. Jans, who will be able to answer your question and provide you with a description of what's happened up until now. Mr. Jans, yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Madame de Bellefeuille, for this question. What I thought I would do, if the Board of Internal Economy is in agreement, is to share the letter that I have provided to you to Madame Scrow, who is the chair of the Liaison Committee. Then she might send it out to the chairs of all 24 parliamentary committees, after which each committee might discuss the matter. And indirectly, in answer to your question, Madame de Bellefeuille, to see whether each of the committees would like to adopt a routine motion, an administrative motion, and of course any a member in any committee can put forward such a motion. As I mentioned in the letter, very often witnesses are called at the last minute. Sometimes it's therefore impossible to actually get headphones to them in time before they appear. We do our best. What I understood, and I don't intend to interrupt you here, but what I have understood is that it might be helpful to have them go through a sound test just before they speak to us. In the past, for example, and this has been improved, the Minister of Immigration was a good example of this. The idea was that just before you testified, you could go through a sound test. So then, of course, one could be reminded that you don't have the proper headphone, but then you could at least find a solution, or you might move on to another witness while a technician corrected the situation with the first one up whose sound wasn't good enough. In other words, ensure that interpretation be possible. Yes, indeed, that would be of a great help in a number of cases. At this point, when we get in touch with witnesses, we send emails to them with information, including our suggestions, strong recommendation that they link up a good 15-20 minutes before they are to appear so that we can test their sound. I imagine that some witnesses don't read these emails fully or not until a few minutes before they link in to us. So something that we have thought of is telephoning some witnesses, especially if this is the first time they are testifying, to advise them that it's very important for them to present themselves ahead of time so that we can run tests. That might help. Thank you, Chair. Very well, let's continue with Mr. Julian and then Mr. Deltel. Mr. Julian. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jans. This information is of great help, very useful, especially given that we have been concerned about the use of French here in Canada. We've had some parliamentary debates on this topic for a couple of weeks now, and a number of motions regarding this issue have been carried in the House. So it's important to have this information before us. I think it's very interesting to see that more than a third of our witnesses are capable of expressing themselves in English. It's not the number of francophones being called to testify. It's rather a matter of the infrastructure that we don't now have available to us. In the Finance Committee, witnesses have often had translation issues such that people expressing themselves in French felt that they really should switch over to English. The figures say something about this dynamic, being that people aren't comfortable speaking in French because they feel ill-equipped and the interpreters are unable to interpret, so the witnesses tend to shift into English. This is something that we must definitely avoid. The recommendations made here should go out to all committees, I think, and these approaches should be adopted rigorously from top to bottom. These technological aids must be available and ready to use so that people can use their French language based on the excellent interpretation services we have available in the House. Statistics are very helpful. Thank you for this information. I don't think there's anyone here who would disagree with our immediately going forward with these recommendations. Fully backed by us. Thank you. No response required. That was a comment. Thank you. Now, let us go ahead with Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Chair. I certainly back what the two speakers have just said. Another element, though, a number of my colleagues in the caucus say this to me, and I'm sure all parties say the same. Every time we come up against a technological problem like this, we lose time. We lose time off the witnesses' testimony, our parliamentary work. Sometimes, of course, we can let this go. Yes, it's not happening as much as it used to, but we have lost a good deal of time. 10, 20 minutes, just lost time. So yes, all the observations made, yes. The recommendations, yes. And I certainly salute the recommendation that we bring people in before they testify and test them. I think this should be systematically done. It's very nice receiving emails. We get so many of them, at least we members do. It's possible that people aren't paying attention to emails. So a telephone call, just like in the good old days, pick up the phone, actually talk to a real person, double check again. Thank you, Chair, for having reminded us yesterday and in the House several times that we must wear the headphones that the House of Commons provides to us. Perhaps one final observation, if you allow me. Many of our colleagues are sometimes working from home or their offices. Perhaps we could allow them to have more than one set of headphones.
Yeah, on this topic, it's one thing with witnesses that we're asking external witnesses that are asking to appear. I think that some of the suggestions that have been made are good ones. Well, we've seen this occur with ministers who are being asked to come to committee to be held accountable before committees, and I really think that in those cases, like this is not something that is surprising or unexpected for ministers, that they need to have headsets, that they need to ensure they have a proper tech, connection. I know it isn't exactly directly related to the committees, but committee of the whole, we had a minister that, hadn't prepared to have a proper internet connection. I really believe that in those kinds of cases, the expectation should be on the minister to make up the time with the committee. If they've wasted 20 minutes of committee time because they didn't have the proper headset or something of that nature, their expectation should be that they make up the time so that the committee has those opportunities. We're seeing that those opportunities are being lost, and now those are very important parts of our democracy to ensure that ministers are accountable. And I think that it's different than a regular witness. Sometimes a witness has been asked on, as you say, short notice, and maybe isn't aware of the requirements that are needed for our committees, but ministers certainly are. And I just really think that if we're going to put something out, that should be included in it as well, that ministers would be expected to make up time if they're not coming prepared with the proper equipment. And
Okay, very good. We'll take that under advisement. And are there any more comments? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres commentaires? Alors, nous allons continuer maintenant avec...
Then we will continue with the working group's recommendation, the LTVP working group's recommendations, and we have the chair, Mr. Stanton.
En tant que président du groupe de travail,
I'm here today as the chair of the LTVP working group to update the board on our work from the last several working group meetings and seeking your support for the design direction regarding 4 elements: the lobbies, the galleries, the West Light Court and the West Foyer Light Well, and fourth, a potential increase in space in the center light court. I'll also update you on two topics: the Independent Design Review Panel and the issue of outreach to parliamentarians. I'll comment briefly on these last two items first.
Le 27 novembre, nous avons passé en revue des moyens d'intégrer et d'informer davantage les parlementaires quant au rythme des travaux de l'édifice du centre et de les inviter à contribuer directement dans les certains secteurs avant la finalisation des formats et des designs intérieurs. Nous pensons que les parlementaires pourraient être informés à l'aide de divers outils de communication, des vidéoconférences, éventuellement des réunions en personne. On présente des vidéos sur le site Web, ainsi que des bulletins réguliers du président de la Chambre. Nous croyons qu'un projet de cette importance, pas seulement pour la cohorte actuelle des parlementaires, mais pour leurs successeurs, profiterait de la participation directe des personnes au sein de ce milieu de travail vaste et complexe, qui est la pièce maîtresse du système gouvernemental du Canada. Passons maintenant aux 4 recommandations de design portant sur les antichambres, les tribunes et des idées pour les cours existants. Comme vous le savez tous, les antichambres du gouvernement et de l'opposition constituent un espace important pour les parlementaires. C'est là.
It's a place where we conduct our parliamentary work, meet with colleagues, and where members will usually spend at least one 10-hour sitting day per week, and occasionally much longer. And it's the gathering place for votes and question period every day. And we're close to our whips and our House Leaders team, and available at a moment's notice for duty in the House itself. We've seen that this space has often been overcrowded, and that is before the expected growth in MP numbers over the coming 5 decades, such that these important spaces will be under even greater pressure. So, in finding ways to address the space pressure on the lobbies, the working group has presented and agreed on a plan to expand the lobbies across 2 floors and parts of the adjacent courtyard. Perhaps Susan could just change the page, go to that section. You see here the proposed 2-story expansion. The 2 floors exist now, and more space would be added at the ground level. The lobbies would stay at the chamber level, but would be expanded vertically from the ground floor into a space at least as large as the current 2nd floor lobbies, with an independent stairwell and elevator access for the level below. The plan also includes an expanded, accessible, and unisex washroom. Yes, we're now at the right page, so you can see it in the center here of this image to the left at the ground floor level. The washroom is right between the two lobbies. And this space would be exclusively to serve parliamentarians and lobby staff on the ground floor. In relation to the lobbies, we recommend that you consider a design for both the government and opposition lobbies that includes additional support space on the ground floor and in the adjacent courtyard with dedicated vertical circulation for both.
On our meeting of October 28th, the House presented us with a proposed design approach for the center block galleries for our review and questions. You'll see the designs there. On the left, the existing galleries on the third floor, and on the right, the proposal. We recognize that the center block galleries needed to be modified to become more accessible. The current physical design is well short of National Building Code standards for accessibility. In fact, prior to the closure of the building, there was minimal accessibility. Meeting the code and accessibility standards will result in a reduction of seating capacity in the galleries from 553 seats to 296. The working group had a really good discussion regarding the average public attendance in the galleries over the periods of time that we experienced them, the extra demand during times like school visits and special addresses in the House, and comparisons with comparable parliaments and legislative assemblies. We asked the administration to investigate the possibility of using some flexible space in those galleries so that the design of the seating would permit a sort of scaling up, if you will, under those special circumstances, but assuring that it meets National Building Code standards. We agreed that in relation to the galleries, we recommend that the board endorse the proposal of a design that complies with National Building Code requirements for accessibility, recognizing that there will be a significant reduction of available seating and that the architects be instructed to consider flexible solutions to accommodate more visitors. So that's the second item. Now moving to the West Light Court and the West Foyer Light Well. At our, at our November 27th meeting, we agreed on a conceptual design, approach, and strategy for the West Light Court. That's what you see in front of you there now. That's an image of the West Light Court looking south. So you would see essentially the outer wall of the House of Commons on your right with the stained glass windows, and then the lower levels as that area or space was closed in. The primary purpose, of course, of the light courts is to bring natural light and ventilation to interior spaces not located on an exterior facade. This is an important part of the architectural and heritage character of Center Block. We were informed that closing the light courts in at the roof level will provide significant improvements on energy performance for the building. The proposed design would convert the larger West Light Court, that's the one you're looking at there now, into an open, light-filled space that would provide public access to the galleries and where visitors to the chamber can circulate between level B1, that's the main level of the Parliament Welcome Center, and levels 2 and 3 in Center Block. It would greatly improve circulation of the public within Center Block, but importantly, it keeps the original architecture of Center Block intact. It also allows the light court to continue to bring natural daylight to the chamber and other interior spaces. In addition, we'll go to the next slide. There's this one additional light court on the west side that's proposed that a new glass enclosure cover what's called the West Light Well. This is right above the House of Commons foyer. Originally designed to restore, essentially to provide natural light in the foyer area. This would effectively restore natural light to that area intended as part of the Beaux-Arts planning for the foyer in the original structure. So that you'll recall that there's this beautiful heritage glass ley light in the foyer ceiling. Currently, that whole light well is closed in due to damage and leaking and so on many decades ago. The idea would be to essentially put a covering over top of that that would allow natural light to be restored to that light well. Accordingly, we recommend to the working group recommends that the board accept and adopt the proposed design approach for both the West Light Court, the larger one, and the West Foyer Light going forward. Finally, we'll go to the fourth item, and that is the Center Light Court. Now, this is a much bigger space, and you'll see there on this sectional of center block, I'll draw your attention to that purple area in the middle. So that Center Light Court spans a much wider space, and in particular, the area above the roof of the Hall of Honor. Now, if you were going down one of the interior hallways in center block on the 4th or 5th floor and looked out towards the Center Light Court, you would see the roof over top of the Hall of Honor, at the 3rd level. So the idea would be to essentially add additional floors on top of that roof that would extend on floors 4, 5, and 6, right to the top, and then, of course, join the north and south hallways in center block on each of those floors. We think it's an excellent opportunity to infill the space in center block to add much needed space for parliamentarians. Up to 600 square meters of space would be added to the functioning interior space, and it would be done in such a way as to not interfere or reduce in any way the natural light that comes into the building. It'll also, of course, as mentioned earlier, provide by capping over effectively the light court and still allowing natural light, it will permit a much better energy efficiency for the building. It should be noted as well that none of this infill would do anything to interrupt the features or construction of the Hall of Honor. It would all occur above that level. We therefore recommend to the board that the proposed infill approach be endorsed for the Center Light Court, with the exception that conservation principles expectation that conservation principles will be respected. And of course, the working group will return to you at a later time to discuss some options for the use of that interior space. En terminant, de façon générale, je tiens à
So in conclusion, all in all, I would like to commend the working group members from all parties on the way they have contributed to this work. I recognize the importance for members to be involved in this project. And to conclude, the working group anticipates another meeting early in the new year, and I will be pleased to bring you updates as our work evolves in the months ahead. I appreciate your attention, and we'll be happy to take questions or provide further details on any of the issues I've provided information on. Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Now we have Mr. Julian, who will begin the questions. Mr. Julian.
This amount of work involved, in addition to all the other hats you wear. So our thanks to yourself and to the team of members of Parliament working with staff on this difficult issue. I have a number of questions, so I'll just lay them all out. I think that's the easiest. First off, in terms of the Center Light Court infill, you haven't mentioned what the possible use would be for that shared space. So it would be helpful to have a few more details on that proposal. As far as the infill court, so the West Light Court and the Light Well, those seem to me to be no-brainers, both in the sense of having had an office a number of times on that West Court. I know the amount of waste of energy that's required to heat the walls of the courtyard, rather than just covering it over and using that space far more effectively. And the light well, it never made sense to me why that was blocked in the first place. And again, there's an energy loss that is there. So bravo in looking at that. I'm concerned about the galleries, quite frankly, that we are cutting basically in half the participation that people are able to come directly into the House of Commons and see parliamentarians at work. And coming from the far west of Canada, 5,000 kilometers, I know when any of my constituents make their way all the way across Canada, they want to have the full experience of our democracy. And they often, when they come, they want to be able to participate in the House of Commons. That hasn't been a problem generally, but if we're cutting the number of seats in half, I think that would be. And I guess I would raise concerns about that. Yes, absolutely, we need to have the ability for people with reduced mobility or people with disabilities to be able to participate fully. And I think there are designated spaces that could achieve that. But I'm very concerned about the cuts in the number of people who can actively participate. And if you could perhaps explain a little bit more, you mentioned a scaling up on occasion. I think that may happen more often than not, particularly when we open the new building. We'll have people coming from across the country to see it. We certainly saw that with the Library of Parliament. So if you could go a little bit more into that, I would appreciate it. I gather that a dedicated internal vertical circulation is Ottawa speak for stairs or an elevator. And I'm wondering, in terms of the lobby, what that actually means. It would seem to me that given the narrowness of the lobby space, that what we're actually doing is having the lobbies in one floor down. And how that access up and down is achieved is important. And my final question is the most important one. What are the cost differentials in doing this? I assume from the West Light Court and the Light Well, probably the energy savings will be far beyond the renovation costs. Some of the other things, it would be helpful for us to know, at least in a ballpark way, what the differential is in between what would be a scaled down version and what could be proposed, because as we're going through a pandemic, I think most Canadians want to make sure that every dollar spent is spent effectively. Nobody wants to see a deterioration of the centre block, quite the contrary. They want to see a renovation, but they don't want to see frills. And I think we have to be very conscious of that to make sure that every dollar spent is effective. And those are my questions. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stanton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Julian, as usual, you've covered all the bases here, and I'll do my best to sort of take them one at a time. On the center light court additional infill of those 3 floors, we did look at very preliminary some potential options as to what that would add. That is one of the things that I think we would like to come back to the board with, and potentially, and I don't mind saying that this would be one area where, in reference to, say, consultations with parliamentarians, it would be something that we could chat with them about as well. I mean, we're far from a decision as to what that interior format would need to look like. But as an example, one could anticipate having on floors 4 and 5, you could add up to, say, 3 different office suites on each floor, so an additional 6 offices in there. Members should know that across the entirety of Centre Block, the number of offices available will be reduced for a number of reasons. So it gives an ability to sort of catch up on some of that. The 6th floor, we believe, because it will be at the top of the building, affords the possibility, and again, not finalized, but the possibility of creating a space for parliamentarians to gather, senators and members. We'll know that there's opportunities for that. So we will get back to you with that, and again, could be the subject of some consultation. With regards to the galleries, I'll just ask Susan if we could put that galleries diagram up there. Mr. Julian, your concerns were shared amongst the working group. Real concerns with the overall reduction in the number of seats in the gallery. When we look at actual attendance in the gallery outside of question period and special events, we'll all know as parliamentarians that for the most part, the 553 seats was well above what was needed. But you're right, in certain special times of the year, and certainly for joint an address to a joint chambers, senators, and parliamentarians, when you need a full gallery, that is why the working group suggested that, as an example, if you look at the east and west interior walls, you'll see that the galleries, this would be the opposition and government lobbies and the speaker's gallery on the east and west side. You'll see that the gallery design, some of those spaces protrude inward into the chamber. Those would be the locations for accessible seating. And there will be occasions during those special addresses, as an example, where not all of that accessible seating will be needed. Similarly, perhaps in the North Gallery, where the design of seating could be done in such a way that it could be, as we suggest, be flexible or scale up to accommodate more persons and still meet National Building Code standards. So we've asked the House administration and PSPC to come back to us. In this case, the House. I think Susan's team would come back to us with some suggestions as, sure enough, have fixed seating and meet all the code for 296, but maybe there's a way where some of that seating could be designed in a way that we could scale up to, some standing room or some other means to accommodate more people on those special occasions. But I will say finally that the 296, relative to the number of members that are in the House, is relatively consistent with other chambers and legislatures that we looked at as well. So the comparison, number of members and number of seats in the gallery. In terms of the lobby access, and we'll go to that. So what we envision, maybe go to the sectional there, Susan, there. So the idea of having an expanded lobby area on the lower floor, you all know that essentially what's on the second floor now, where the lobbies are situated, will effectively stay the same, with the exception of the area that protrudes into the light court on the right-hand side. So there's a little bit of expansion there that will permit elevator access, for example, and other stair access for the opposition lobby side. But on the lower floor, you'll effectively have a space equally in size as to the second floor. And each of those sides, both the opposition and government side, will have their own independent stairway and elevator, so that members attending the lobby during the day can move up and down freely, and it would be fully accessible. We appreciate it will create some potential issues around keeping members connected to their whips and deputy or their leadership teams while they're there. But considering that the number of MPs that the House will need to accommodate on the usual proportions over the next 50 years, if the same formula is kept in place, we're already under space pressures now. It's only going to get worse down the road. Finally, on the cost differentiations on the light court proposals, I'm going to ask Rob to see if he could comment on that.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So maybe first I'll just the lobby. So we looked at two options for essentially for the chambers. So the option that you have here, and these costs include the work on the galleries in the chamber and for the lobbies. So the option that is proposed here is costed at approximately $75 million. The alternative option, which was the expanded chamber option that we looked at, was a little in excess of $300 million. So those were the two kind of comparative options that we looked at. The proposed option here, that again includes the work on the galleries, the chamber, and the lobbies, would be approximately $75 million. On the light wells, as you point out quite correctly, there's a number of puts and takes from a cost perspective, so it is a little more complex. We could come back with cost comparisons on there because there are the energy consumption considerations. The covering the light wells is essential to the sustainability strategy for the center block. We have a carbon neutral strategy for the center block. The center block before it closed was the worst performing from an energy performance, from an energy usage and a GHG emission perspective within our portfolio. So that is essential to the strategy going forward. The other thing that would be important to note is that especially the west and east courtyards, it provides the use of these courtyards provides the universal accessible access for Canadians to the galleries. And without using the courtyards in this way, we would have to find another, probably more costly way that would impact the heritage kind of components of the center block. So this sidesteps a number of those issues. So it is critical to the sustainability strategy, it is critical to the universal accessibility strategy, and it provides, as the Deputy Speaker indicated, the growth of parliamentarians, it provides some additional elbow room for the building, which is critical and is part of returning the center block to the original vision of John Pearson of making sure that there's symmetry, a light-filled space, and common use space for Parliament, which is essential and has been lost a bit over the years as functionality has kind of with the need of space, has overtaken some of this common space.
Very good. That's fine. Okay, we'll go on to Mr. Richards, followed by Monsieur Teltel.
Okay. Yeah, just to I guess follow along there. One of my three questions was addressed already, but I've got two additional, and I'll just to follow up on the light court proposal. So we have the proposal for us with the west foyer, the west light court. Is there a similar proposal being put before our colleagues in the Senate for the east side and a light court there? Just curious on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Indeed, there is. You may know that there is a working group, much like ours on the House side, that is getting constituted this month to deal with these issues as well. There is an east light court as well that is primarily surrounded by the Senate offices, but it is worth noting that there are House of Commons offices that are typically face on that light court as well. So that's the subject of some discussion right now. Has not been finalized as of yet, but we'll be we are in the midst of discussions with the Senate working group to meet with them hopefully in the new year.
Okay, and just as a follow-up on that, how will the, especially, you do mention that there are, say in that case, for example, House of Commons offices that back into that area as well. How will the interface between the two work so that we can ensure that things are coordinated in a proper fashion, so that we're not getting sort of two very different outcomes on the side?
We're looking at finding a way to certainly get agreement on what is done there. But I think overall the core objectives around ensuring that we are maintaining the heritage objectives and keeping the architectural integrity of this amazing building in place. I mean, yes, we can modernize it, make it better from an energy efficiency point of view, but we're going to do all we can to make sure that we walk that line between an incredibly complex and busy operating workplace, while at the same time maintaining that integrity and keeping the character, the interior surfaces and spaces in such a way that it retains those remarkable features for generations to come.
Okay. One other question I have, and it wasn't really within the scope of your presentation this morning, but I am really curious about the Welcome Center and how that will now look in terms of the entrance for, right now, of course, we have the one entrance in front of the Peace Tower. Is that still is that preserved in this, or is there something done? Like, I've always found that sort of a bit of an odd and very awkward circumstance. What is the plans for that going forward, or can you address that today?
So the Parliament Welcome Centre will be. We did adopt an approach there that will have the main entrance for Parliament, if you will, essentially on either side of the main stairs, right in the center section as you walk towards the Peace Tower. As you approach those main stairs, the entrance for the public and for other, that is still somewhat part of a discussion how we're going to finalize the uses. That's a discussion that's being had, and one of the things the IDRP spoke with us about as well. But to make sure that as the public come up there, they'll enter what is essentially the center point of the whole parliamentary, as they say, the triad, the east, west, and center block. And what you will see on the surface, though, essentially as you look from Wellington up towards the Peace Tower, much of that is essentially going to stay the same. The lawn will be the same size. The Vaux wall, that stone wall that originates to the original structure, will all be there. And members and senators will still have their own private entrances as they do now at grade level on the east and west end of the buildings. So but the main public will enter from the sides of the stairs, essentially go slightly downward at that point. And the main level, B1 in the Parliament Welcome Centre, is where most of the public will clear security and have those features of the Welcome Centre there. And that's from there that they would proceed. If they were going to the galleries, they would take the elevators up to the third floor from that location.
So when you say the sides of the stairs, do you mean the stairs that were sort of there now, or were there right under the Peace Tower, or are you talking about stairs that are sort of from the lawn level going up?
The latter. So if you walk up that main walkway, and there's the grand staircase that goes up to the upper, call it a mezzanine level almost, that's at grade level with the entrance to the Peace Tower. It's at the base of those main stairs, and then left and right-hand sides of that is where you will go into the Welcome Centre.
Okay, so I think that does address what I was concerned with, which is the way it was previously. We've had we all know there's been situations where someone's coming directly into the building. That we're avoiding that situation now. Someone will have to have cleared security before they're entering the main building itself.
Exactly correct. Yeah, and
okay.
And the fact that it'll be a prominent entrance. Wayfinding was an issue, so as people walk up to this grand building, the entrance literally will be right in front of them. And the closer they get to the building, they'll immediately see that the entrance is welcoming them there.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. Maintenant, nous allons continuer avec Monsieur Deltel.
Let's go to Mr. Deltel. Mr. Deltel, the floor is yours. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Stanton. I have 3 issues to bring up with you. First, the floor of the House of Commons. Right now, 338 members, and we understand that we are not planning for the next 200 years, demography being what it is. Nevertheless, we will surely have more members. It will be difficult to enlarge the space once we have set walls. So do you have any evaluations of the number of members who could sit in the House of Commons that we foresee? And do you foresee any changes, given that it's difficult to see how we could sit 500 there? Yes, thank you, Mr. Deltel. This is a very relevant question. And the working group is considering this. At this point, we don't have discussion elements to propose, though, about the details of this space. In the new year, though, we will probably be in a position to discuss the options to accommodate all members. As for the number and the timeline for the renovations, we're speaking of about 50 years. Until from 2018 through 2058. 68, rather, sorry. So the number of members stands at present at 338, and it will go to around 460 by around 2060. That's what we foresee. So we will find a way to accommodate all members in the House of Commons in a manner that, well, for example, I remember a recommendation to the effect that there's a preference to keep the opposition to one side of the House. Yes, that's probably the best approach, based upon which we can work out some choices and present them to you. Thank you. I guess it will take a good deal of creativity to solve this. A technical question now. Are you keeping the floors that currently exist? Is that right? Perhaps. Perhaps I'll ask Susan to comment on this. Yes, there are different possibilities, of course. But this isn't the right time yet to look at this in this detail. Susan, do you have any comments on this? Thank you. Yes, we have drawn up some options for setting out all the seats to receive around 460 members. This is a conceptual plan so far. We need to work it in greater detail and then get back to the working group with detailed layouts to show what's possible and be in a position to choose the best option for the House. Thank you, Madam. Second question. I've had the pleasure of visiting the work site a couple of weeks ago, within the last month, with some colleagues. Much appreciated. There weren't that many surprises, given that everything was really well prepared before the work was commenced. So that's a very good sign. But do you foresee a calendar for the end of this? When will this come to an end? Of course, Mr. Deltel, I appreciate your having taken the time to visit. And I certainly invite all other members to tour the work site if you're available, if you have the time to do so. I think, as you do, that there's been no surprise as to the quality of the work underway, it being well prepared. And your question is, yes, we know that the kind of final dates for the completion of the work has been sort of evasive, 10 to 20 years. Do we have a more specific timeline at present for completing the work? Perhaps Rob or others could add. Thank you so much, Chair, for this question. We are making decisions such as those being discussed here today, and these decisions are essential. It's essential for us to be able to develop a long-term calendar on. I can say it's closer to 10 than 20 years. That's for sure. That said, the decisions made about the options being presented are essential for determining a basic calendar, basic timeline, a very important thing to do. Final matter, more of a comment, Mr. Stanton. I would like to thank you and congratulate you on the quality of your work. It's really important to make that, and it's certainly much appreciated, and I really take good note of the quality of your work. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Now, let's go to Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez. You're on mute, sir. There we are. My good friend, Monsieur Deltel, has already asked my two questions, so I have nothing to add. Can we confirm there's been no collusion, Chair? Yes, we confirm, Chair. No collusion. How unfortunate. It's very nice to see people working together. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Stanton.
And I know you've been putting a lot of time into this, and I want to thank your team as well. And we look forward to seeing you again with more good news. Thank you.
J'espère. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a. Est-ce qu'on est d'accord? Do we have a?
Do we agree?
The next item is proposed 2021-2022 main estimates, and our presenter is Daniel Paquette, Chief Financial Officer. Monsieur Paquette.
Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a presentation of the main estimates for 21-22 for approval of the board. And this budget summarizes funding that has already been approved by the Board of Internal Economy. So there are no new funding requests in this presentation. The main estimates for 2021-2022 is set at $543.7 million for an increase of 53% compared to the main estimates of last year. Pursuant to the Parliament of Canada Act, the House can compile expenditure forecasts for fiscal years coming and must transmit them to the Treasury Board to be tabled as main estimates for the Government of Canada. And it covers voted appropriations and statutory expenditures. So the voted appropriations are now set at $383.5 million, including expenses of deputies and House officers, of committees, associations, and parliamentary exchange groups, as well as administrative expenditures. The statutory expenditures are $160.2 million, salaries of MPs and House officers, retirement allocations for parliamentarians, and retirement agreements and employee benefit plans.
Previously approved policies and existing legislation. These are the office budgets and supplements for members and House officers, as well as the travel status expense accounts for 21-22, which have been increased by 1% for a total of $1.7 million. This is in accordance with the Adjusted Consumer Price Index. The main estimates also include a budget adjustment of $1.2 million for some of the members' offices' budgets to account for the changes in electoral supplements following the general election in 2019. In addition, sessional allowances and additional salaries for members and House officers have been increased by 2.1% or $1.3 million as provided by the Parliamentary of Canada Act. Economic increases for House administration employees, which were approved by the board earlier this year, amount to $5.6 million, which has been included in the main estimates for this year, or for next fiscal year. In addition, these main estimates include the fundings related to initiatives that have recently been approved, that is the net increase in $4.5 million for the long-term vision and plan, the $6.6 million for security enhancements for members, as well as the $5.2 million funding to stabilize various administrative functions within the House administration. These main estimates also include a decrease of $1 million relating to funding for conferences and associations and assemblies, leaving $300,000 for the 65th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference, which was postponed from this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic and is now planned to take place in August 21. Finally, an increase of $700,000 in contribution to members' pension plan has been included due to the revised contribution rates for members. I would also like to point out that while we are still considering uncertainties surrounding the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, its continuing impact on operations and associated public health measures that will be required, these main estimates have been prepared using the planning assumption that operations would return to near normal during the upcoming fiscal year. This has been done to ensure that sufficient funding is available to meet the needs of the House over the coming year. That being said, we will we'd like to assure you that we will continue to monitor these unprecedented and evolving situations, and will take any necessary adjustments over the course of the year to ensure that we continue to adapt operations of the House. And these will be also to make sure that we meet the needs of members in the fulfillment of their parliamentary function. So in conclusion, it is recommended the board approve the proposed 21-22 main estimates for the House of Commons for the amount of $543.7 million. This funding will be divided between the two programs, for which $321 million for members and House officers and $222.7 million for the House administration. Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation on the proposed main estimates. We can answer questions the members may have.
Okay, we'll go on to questions. Mr. Julian has the first round of questions.
Merci beaucoup. Je trouve ça inquiétant.
Thank you very much. I find this very troubling, to be frank, because for this main estimates, we have about 5% increase compared to the last fiscal year. Even considering an inflation rate of around 1-2%, this is troubling. If I understand correctly from the presentation you've just made, and thank you very much for having done so, Mr. Paquet, you have spoken of salary increases, which is to be expected, but also expenses that are somewhat, special, given the situation, IT and security and so on. And you've mentioned the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic over the past year that will go on into the coming fiscal year. So 2 questions. First, this overall impact of COVID-19, I mean, in more or less, and what you see the impact of that on next year's main estimates. Second, how about the supplementary estimates? I think what people expect from us during this pandemic is, keeping our overall budgets reasonable without great increases. If we have main estimates that show considerable increase compared to the prior year, but the supplementary estimates for the coming year being lower than usual, perhaps that would ensure some sort of fiscal balance. But if we get an increase for supplementary estimates as well, this will become very worrisome. Those are my 2 questions. And thank you for providing all these details in these estimates. Mr. Paquet. Yes, indeed. So as for COVID-related expenses, we have a purpose or object on the agenda, which we can get into details about. Some of the expenses are less, given that people can't travel, training has been reduced, and so on. So there are more decreases than the rising costs to adapt to the pandemic. So that's of some benefit. So background. Over the last few years, the House administration has been changing. We have a number of new technologies that have been onboarded. We have the new West Block and new buildings being used, and a number of acts have come into effect that have an effect as well on our budget. Security, for example. What we see here is investment to develop the competency and capacity to ensure that we are able to maintain this transformation in the years to come. Usually what we have is a rollover of funds, which is, of course, current practices, but we don't know ahead of time what the amounts will be. But in the current year, we've asked for more than the rollover, given that the collective agreements that had been negotiated had a retroactive effect on our budgeting without necessarily being able to anticipate any surplus from the pandemic period. We wanted to make sure we had funding to cover our undertakings. But right now, there's no further initiative that would bring our budget up higher than what we would normally request in rollover funding for the following year. Are there any other questions? So we have a recommendation Do we accept the recommendation to go ahead? It's been accepted very well. Now let's move on to item 5.
I did want to just ask.
Okay,
a couple
we'll
of
go back
questions
then.
as
We'll
well.
let you please ask your questions. Monsieur Paquette is still with us. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I sometimes it can be a little slow when you have to unmute yourself, so apologies for that. Just a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. One was similar in nature to Mr. Julian's questions, but I'll leave it for this second part, because the other side of it is that there has been some areas that have seen decreases as well. One of them was the Office of the Law Clerk, and also for legal services. And I'm just concerned because I know at Health Committee, the law clerk had indicated to us that there were some resource constraints that he faced in vetting some of the documents that he is going to have to do in response to the order made by the House on 26th of October. So I'm just wondering if we can have any comment on that decrease in resources, and whether the law clerk has the resources that he needs now to be able to process those documents that the House and its committees have asked him to vet and to redact.
Very good. I'll open it up. I guess Monsieur Dufresne.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. And so the indication about increases in resources for the legal services at the House were increases that occurred in this past year. In terms of your question with respect to the committee, I did appear in front of the Health Committee last week and gave information about what we are expecting in terms of a potential volume of disclosure. And we indicated that we had organized our resources to be prepared to deal with that task that the House has given us, but giving some parameters in terms of volumes and in terms of the time that it would take us to review a certain number of documents. And so to give a sense to the committee, there had been some testimony about documents being in the millions of pages. And so that give a sense that may take some time, but that we were prepared to do what was necessary to achieve our task.
Okay, so you don't feel there's any additional resources that you require in order to be able to complete that in a timely fashion?
Well, we indicated that we could conduct the review of about 50,000 documents in 7 days, and that there were talks of a much higher number than that, but we don't know yet how many we will receive. We also indicated that we would advise the committee as soon as we knew the specific number, so that next steps could be considered.
Okay. On the other side of things, I share the concern generally about, there are some pretty large increases, certainly, and Mr. Julian has addressed those to a large degree. But I wanted to just touch on it specifically, because looking at sort of line items, there's some pretty huge increases in terms of specific line items. And the two of the largest were employee relations, which is a 78% increase, I believe. Human Resources Service Center, 76% increase. And one of the others that is among the larger is Occupational Health, Safety, and Environment, which is up 26%. So I'm just curious, those all sort of seem to group together in the category of, labor and employment issues, and I'm just wondering, is that driven by the pandemic, or is there something else that's responding to? Because those are pretty alarming increases.
Mr. Paquette.
All right. So I'll start, and then I'll let my peer add to it, Mr. Laframboise. So some of these are the increases when we talked about the capacity for human HR services for members that was increased last year. And now we're actually stabilizing the funding. And then there was some of the capacity relating to some of the new legislation that was also stabilized this year. And if I'm not mistaken, there's been some reallocation of resources and alignments for within HR. But I'll let Madame Laframboise address more particularly the items in those.
Merci, Daniel. Thank you for your question. So a couple of the things that you mentioned, the HR Service Center has a large increase because it is a relatively new unit, and it was put in place in response to the implementation of an enterprise resource planning system and program. The point of which that ERP system is all about integrating
One moment,
our businesses.
Ms. Laframboise, we are having a problem with translation. Est-ce que ça fonctionne maintenant, or is it working now? I guess I should be talking in English to see if it's translating.
Laframboise parle pour voir.
Oh, Ms. Laframboise, can
yes, absolutely. So do you want me to just sort of continue to respond?
Yes, please. We just want to make sure that the translation is taking place. We've been having some technical glitches, and we just want to make sure everything works well.
I think I may be speaking too fast as well. I apologize. So in essence, one of the questions you asked was around the HR Service Center and the large increase to that group. That group is a new unit that was put in place in response to the implementation of the Enterprise Resource Planning Program and System. That the ERP is an integrated resource planning function that is going to, in the long term, help us to align and streamline our resources, stabilize the organization, and definitely in the long term will help us manage our funding and our resources better. So that is one piece of it. The other part you spoke to was the occupational health and safety. There absolutely has been an increase in that function as a result of the implementation of Bill C-65, keeping in mind that we onboarded the members and the organization to a relatively significant piece of legislation to put in place the regulations and to adopt and incorporate new programs, new policies, a significant amount of training to onboard to Bill C-65. So that is definitely an increase as well. Our plan going forward is to stabilize the organization, to leverage the enterprise resource planning and the integrated business planning piece to maintain and continue our protections and our policies under the OSH and the Bill C-65. So those are kind of the bigger pieces of what you had asked about.
So what you're saying to me is it's really something that's been established in response to Bill C-65, like that is that what you're saying to me?
Yeah. Yes, a very large portion of it is Bill C-65. As I mentioned earlier, we have 17 programs and policies that need amending, and the employer's obligations are significant and require a lot of work up front. In the long term, hopefully we'll be able to stabilize that, potentially look at aligning and streamlining some of those resources going forward. It is absolutely my plan to do that.
Okay, and now back to more broadly. I want to just get a sense as to what measures there are in place internally to slow down expenditure growth. You know, Mr. Julian mentioned that we're seeing over 5% increase in what we're seeing here. But I believe if you look back from 2014 to now, there's been a 29% increase in the expenditures in the House's estimates. So this is a pretty large increase over a 5 or 6 year period. Wondering what measures are there in place to ensure that this expenditure growth can be slowed down? What should the board be looking at? Is there any advice you can provide us on what we can be looking at as a board in terms of measures that can be put in place to ensure that we have stronger fiscal prudence, stronger controls, and make sure that we're not seeing these continual increases year over year?
This might just to reassure you that we definitely in the last 2 or 3 years have been doing a lot of effort making sure that if we come forward for any requests of funding, that we do an assessment, making sure that we restabilize some of the resources and realign where we can to make sure that the requests are only for what we need. And there's been progression of many legislative changes or other demands around services. So cost of living is obviously one of the big ones here, and that's the pieces above and beyond that. So incremental services, when we look at some of the pieces for legislation, so legislation around the disclosure, legislation around health and safety, then we had the increased capacity around services for members around HR. We had also the security that's more recent, and then onboarding. The most significant portion of the growth over the last 3 or 4 years is the onboarding and taking control of the various new buildings on the parliamentary precinct. And those we've really made sure that we challenged, work with the experts, and that we just ask for what we need to maintain these various systems and tools that are given to us for that assignment. So there's been a lot of many of these things that are maybe outside of the control of the administration to react ahead of time to try to manage these, but we try to make sure that our request for funding is limited to what is needed to maintain and support those infrastructure.
So I want to come back to this idea of finding ways to put in place controls for better fiscal prudence. But you sort of led me into the other question I had, which is fairly large increases in terms of the employment figures as well. We saw an increase, I believe, from 1,827 to 2,214. It's about a 21% increase. It's a pretty big jump as well. A couple of the bigger jumps, procedural services, we saw will go from 261 to 442. And then we saw a more than doubling in size of the Office of the Deputy Clerk of Administration from 37 to 77. I'm wondering, is that just an increase in, is there more part-timers with the pandemic? Is that really a legitimate full-time equivalent increase? What are driving these huge, 21% increase in employment figures?
So the report that we provided to you with the documentation this time represents the staff that we have on force at the time we prepared the documentation. So it gives you a full sense of how many people we have working on the precinct. Previously, that 1,700 or so people that you saw was representing more in the numbers that we're looking at, the actual full-time indeterminate or full-time long-term terms or long-term terms part-time. It didn't have some of our short-term seasonal workers. It didn't have many of the other people that we have that are supporting that are not necessarily there on a permanent basis on the precinct. So we made sure that to make sure that for you to have a full picture, we made sure that we had that complete on site at that particular point in time. And my apologies, we should have had a note to that effect on the documentation that we were presenting a different number, not a growth in numbers. But agreed, there has been some growth given all of the items that I've identified earlier. We are, many of the services we offer require the capacity to support that, and that growth is there, but it's not that 21% that you've seen in between the documentation we've seen before in this one.
So you're saying what we're seeing there is a snapshot in time, and the 21% wouldn't be an accurate portrayal of the growth. What would you say would be what would be more accurate in terms of a percentage of growth?
I don't have that number in front of me. We could reproduce the report that you had received last time for the mains on the same basis, so you can have that, and we can provide that to the board members to have a better analysis.
That would be appreciated. And you can't ballpark that for me? I mean, I wouldn't hold you to it, of course, but you can.
It's, no, I can't at this point, because I look at so many different numbers, and I don't have typically the FTE numbers or full-time staff with the financial ones.
So perhaps if you could give us a better picture of what the growth would be in terms of FTE. Okay, and just back just to what I was on before there, just with regards to measures that can be put in place, I understand responding to legislative changes, things like that. But there's obviously, 29% is far up over and above inflation for sure. In terms of the expenditure growth, is there suggestions that I'll throw it out in something that comes to mind for me. What about looking at requiring some sort of offsetting decreases where there is new increases in spending? Is that something that administration would be welcoming to, or what kind of suggestions could you give us that we could look at in terms of ways we could ensure we're not seeing such continual growth?
I mean, definitely we can work with the board members and basically list out all the various services that we provide, and provide an opportunity to balance off and maybe reduce some of the service levels or the types of service that we offer to support members. And then we can also offer up to look at the back, well, I'll call the back office that supports all of these to make sure that we keep those under control going forward. We have been doing some of this, but we can definitely work with members of the board to do a bit more.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Very good. I just want to reconfirm, based on the new questions, are we still in accordance with the recommendation? Everybody's fine? Okay. Maintenant, nous allons continuer avec le point numéro 5.
Now I will continue to item number 5, our quarterly financial report for the second quarter of 2020-2021. Once again, we will hear from Mr. Paquette, Chief Financial Officer. Thank you, Chair. I would like to present the quarterly financial report for the second quarter. So this is looking to the future. It is difficult to explain financial trends this year without keeping in mind the impact of the pandemic. Therefore, I will present the second quarter today, as well as the report that we gave you in the update for the pandemic expenses. So I'll be presenting items 5 and 6 on the agenda here today together. Let me begin with the quarterly financial report, which shows the financial information for the current year being compared to the prior fiscal year. As I mentioned last quarter, the comparison between this year and last year is somewhat unusual in that these are two atypical or non-standard years. This year, we're dealing with the pandemic, which has affected our expenditure trends. And last year, of course, we had a general election, which, of course, has expenditure trends of its own. Therefore, any comparisons will show and be influenced by these unusual expenditures that show in the figures. So, going to the report, as at the 30th of September, authorizations approved for 2020-2021 are $539 million, which is an increase of $18.2 million, or 3.5% compared to 2019-2020. The largest changes are the increase of $5.9 million for House administration employees and $4.4 million for large investments, as well as $3.1 million for increases linked to the cost of living of members and House officials. As well, $30.8 million is attributable to, or $1.7 million rather, for budget adjustments after the election. As of the 30th of September, we are speaking of $30.8 million compared to $240 million in the prior year.
Et Monsieur Richards. Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Mr. Deltel, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Paquette, for your presentation. 2 observations. We certainly understand for reorganizing the riding offices. I'm speaking of what you say at page 6, and $432 million. So that's about $1,000 per riding for the masks, to allow people to work safely, and so on and so forth. Is that correct? Yes. Have any members not needed to make these changes? Yes. Some members didn't find it necessary to make all these changes at their riding offices, or decided to close their offices temporarily, or whose offices were laid out in such a way that they didn't necessarily need to put up physical barriers, for example, the plastic separators and so on. So quite a few of them did not have these expenditures. A couple of lines earlier, you're speaking of printing and 1.2 million, am I correct? Yes, 1.2 million is the right figure. I'd like to know, is this the amount saved on printing, saved by the House of Commons printing services? At this point, given that we don't have the employees of the print section, they've remained on the payroll. The savings is for the material and supplies. Right now, this figure is a combination of all the services that have been interrupted, including food. I don't have a specific amount for printing, but my impression is that the saving would be a little less than what you see right there, given that we still did pay the salaries of the employees, the print employees who remained on the payroll. And what was their production then? Right. Well, at that point, they were under lockdown, and therefore they were on a leave measure. They weren't able to work on the work site. We hadn't yet set things up for them to be able to work safely in the printing area, so there was no production. Correct.
to the side or not being not being able to be done to maybe the capacity we would have liked as a result of reassignments.
So I'll give you an example that you probably know, the ambassador service that we offer to members in the committees and also for their offices. It's a group of around about 20 people, anyways, less than 20. But we took that group and had to reassign them to the onboarding for members for the virtual committees and also for the virtual chamber. That's an example of changes that we've made. We've also had to reassign some of our security folks to work on specific items relating to ensuring the security for these virtual meetings. So we did some changes there. We also looked at some application, the support that we offer for some application, the people that were working in that area. We basically reassigned them to also specific operation roles as it relates to virtual chamber and virtual committees. So that's the type of decision that we had to make in order not to increase costs to the organization. Because the incremental cost from our perspective for virtual parliament as of September was really around $1.2 million, and we were able to maintain that incremental cost low because of these reassignment that we've done.
Okay, and while we're on the topic of virtual parliament, with regards to committees, we've obviously been told that with logistical issues and maintenance issues with the systems, this approach that we've been using, this hybrid approach for committee meetings, is going to have to stop, we're told, for about a month during the upcoming winter adjournment here. I think the dates, if I remember correctly, I might be off a little bit, but roughly from December 19th for about a month, we would see a shutdown. And what we're sort of told is that would prevent committees and even Parliament, if it needed to be recalled, from being able to sit in any kind of a way, even if there is an emergency situation that develops. And we've seen that in the past, that this sometimes does happen while House is in adjournment. Can we get a bit more of an explanation, especially for Canadians who might be following the proceedings like today, what exactly is going on there, why that's happening, what could be done to ensure that there is an ability for emergency situations to be dealt with? Could it be done in some kind of a staggered fashion so that even one committee could be accommodated where there might be an emergency? Obviously, there are reasons why that needs to happen, and we certainly wouldn't want to shut down our Parliament completely for a month if that was necessary. So can we get some explanation of what's happening there, and also an indication of what could be done to ensure that there is ability to function in a limited capacity if the emergency situation arises?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Richard, just for one comment to start, I can guarantee you that if there would be an emergency, the House would be able to return. That's the first statement I want to make. I think we pride ourselves on ensuring that this House sits, and we will guarantee that this happens if ever there's such an emergency.
So could I just add to that, like in relation to committees, like there are obviously times where an emergency committee meeting is required. Can we have the same assurance and guarantee that would be possible if needed?
Well, if there would be an emergency and the Speaker would require us to make this happen, Mr. Richards, we'd certainly find a way to make this happen. Having said that, what we're planning to do is maintenance that we usually do when the House is not sitting. And this year, it's been an extraordinary year. We haven't had a chance to do the maintenance that is required to some of our core systems. And when I'm speaking maintenance, I'm not talking about general IT maintenance of the network and stuff like that. I'm talking about the broadcasting systems that support the chamber and the committees. And we need to make the necessary maintenance in order to prevent failures to these systems this winter, sir. So the approach that we've taken in order to minimize risk is we're going to focus on the core systems at the beginning during the Christmas period. We're going to be working over the Christmas period from the 28th to the 5th in order to update and maintain these systems and replace the systems that needs to be replaced during that period. And then after that, our plan, sir, is to start focusing on committee rooms one at a time in order to start ramping up the systems as we can. So we are taking a staggered approach, sir, in order to minimize risk to the organization, but it does have an impact on our ability to offer services to all the committees as I have just mentioned, sir, due to these changes that we need to make.
No, understood. I want to just make sure to make it clear that, we do appreciate that, there's been a lot of change and a lot of adaptation required, and you guys have done, under very difficult circumstances, a really good job of trying to ensure that we're keeping pace with what's required. And I do understand that can sometimes involve stuff that's far beyond my comprehension in terms of technical capabilities. So I do appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really do appreciate the assurances that you've just given us that there would be some way found to ensure that, in those urgent and emergency type situations that because that was where my big concern was, and I'm really glad to hear that you're telling us that there will be ways to accommodate that if needed.
We'll now continue to Mr. Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a note, I'm noticing that these meetings are running a lot longer, and we're having a frequency of meeting that is starting to get increased significantly because we're taking a long time to get through the business. I just would encourage members to avail themselves of the opportunity before the meetings to try to go through as many of these questions as possible. The time typically that we move through these agenda items is a lot more rapid. So I'm just concerned with how much time we have. We're not getting through these items, and I'm concerned about the frequency of meetings that we're having with Boy. We're going to start turning into a weekly meeting here, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you for the comments. We'll now go to Mr. Julian.
Yeah, I'd have to say I agree with Mr. Holland on this. We have some extremely important decisions to get to, and the financial records. I found the staff are very, very good at providing answers. There are also questions that really are a matter for House leaders and whips to discuss in another forum, and I think we need to be focused on the work that we need to do as a Board of Internal Economy. For example, today I can't go past 1 o'clock, and we're not going to get to the end of the agenda, which means we'll have to meet again next week, and we're meeting now on a weekly basis. So I think Mr. Holland's comments are very valid. We have to be concise and focused, do the work that we have to do, ask the important questions, but there are many ways of asking those questions beforehand, and also making sure that the issues that are a part of another domain, like House leaders, like the whips meetings, are kept there.
Very good. Thank you to both of you. I just want to encourage all members that on a granular level, maybe just take a step up and look at what pertains to the Board of Internal Economy. That might be some good advice to look at. I'll leave it at that. And we'll move on to item number 7, support for employee telework, arrangements and temporary measures in effect due to COVID-19. This seems to be the Monsieur Paquette show today. I'll let him continue.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll let Jose Fernandez present this topic for you. For me, this one here, he's my deputy CFO who manages the team that reviews all these policies and has worked on it. I'll also, at this point here, since we're working remotely, I'll mention to him quickly that we're going to look at abbreviating the present. There's a lot of material in this next section. We'll abbreviate the presentation so that we can get to your questions as quickly as possible, given the time that we have going forward. So, José, je te donne la parole.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this presentation follows up on an analysis requested by the board at its meeting of October 8th in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are 2 parts to this presentation. So the first part is for the support of members' employees telework arrangements, and the second part is on the temporary measures in effect due to COVID-19. So for the first part, the House Administration reviewed its application of current bylaws and policies related to equipment typically required by an employee to perform their duties, and the flexibility provided to members in the use of House resources to be more responsive to this exceptional situation. So I won't, just to show a little bit the time, I won't go maybe in the specifics here, but talking here about the mobile computing or the portable computing devices, flexibility in printing, and as well from a mental health and well-being perspective, the House Administration has reminded members and their employees of resources available on the SOURCE website through different webinars series that were offered there as well. And finally, the board also approved last May COVID-19 temporary measures in constituency offices to support the implementation of the necessary preventive measures in accordance with guidelines issued by public health authorities. This provided support to reopen constituency offices and their employees to return to the office. So this brings me to the second part of this presentation. Et maintenant, pour la seconde.
And now for the second part, which are the temporary measures in force because of COVID-19. Despite the pandemic, members of Parliament continue to provide services to their constituents through their constituency offices, some more so during the pandemic. Several offsets have been, additional costs have been approved. For example, consumables up to $1,500 per office. So this is non-medical masks, hand sanitizers, floor stickers. In short, what we're used to seeing now when we enter establishments open to the public. The second measure is the purchase and installation of plexiglass and reconfiguration of offices to comply with the distancing rules. Here the limit was $2,000 per constituency office, and where required, up to a maximum of $3,500 per office with pre-approval, however. And these expenses were charged to the central office budget. So about 90% of members spent less than 75% of the maximum amount allocated. The third measure were professional cleaning and disinfection costs following the confirmation of an actual confirmed case of COVID-19 in a member's constituency office. When it comes to advertising, to ensure that members could communicate with their constituents, we approved a limit on advertising expenses increased to 20% of the budget of 2000 and 2021. And we allowed for new contents of advertisements, such as allowing MPs' advertisements to include information on the subject of COVID of interest to their constituents. Nearly all members used less than 20% of this amount this fiscal year. We also evaluated the impact of these measures, temporary measures, on offices.
Of the impacts of these temporary measures on members' office budget for the current fiscal year. So we have compared the budget utilization with two previous fiscal years, given that the last fiscal year was an election year and its expenditure patterns are not typical. So as of October 31, which is a little more than half a fiscal year, 99% of members use less than 60% of their members' office budget. So we have seen here overall that the budget utilization is lower than in the last two fiscal years we compared. Restrictions on travel and gatherings imposed by governing bodies and public health authorities have contributed to a significant decrease in travel and hospitality expenditures. So given our review, we do not recommend any changes at this time to the temporary measures. And as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to evolve, the House Administration will continue to monitor members' overall expenses and the specific impacts of the temporary measures. So we would like to come back to you in the winter with our recommendations for measures for next fiscal year. So at that point, we'll be having almost a full year worth of data. So we're better positioned to provide our recommendations for these or other measures to the board. So this concludes my presentation. We're available for questions or feedback from the board. Thank you.
Very good. Are there any questions and comments? We have Mr. Richards. Mr. Richards?
Yeah, just one thing I want to touch on. My colleague, Mr. Deltel, was asking a little bit about printing and mailing after the last presentation. And I've had certainly a number of, complaints, I suppose, for lack of a better way of putting it, from my caucus in terms of capacity constraints. There's longer periods of time required to get things completed, and that's making it so that things aren't really being received by constituents in a timely enough fashion. It's almost, for lack of a better way of putting it, a sort of old news by the time they receive it. So I'm wondering if you would be able to, in this context of the pandemic, be able to bring forward on a priority basis some sort of proposal for our consideration to renew the temporary measure that was allowing for external printing. I had a lot of very positive feedback about that, and I think many members are finding it very helpful in this context. And I think we should be looking at renewing that. Is there any way we could be brought a proposal brought to us on how that could be done?
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Patrice on that one. Monsieur Patrice.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. I have heard the same concern as you did, so I can guarantee you that we'll look at putting quickly a proposal that will allow to address those concerns.
Great, thank you. That's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Commentaires? Oh, Madame Petit-Pateller.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. J'ai une question très rapide.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question. Throughout the pandemic, we have needed to set up home offices to carry on our work. I would like to know whether Mr. Paquette or Mr. Fernandez can tell us how many devices have been purchased, let's say laptops, smartphones, that sort of thing, to equip home offices. Right now, what we see is an increase in overall expenditures for office equipment, including IT. We know that there's a very well-monitored, very restrictive approach to those. And often this occurs in the year after an election as well. New members who need to set up and adjust their offices, that leads to such purchases as well. So we do see this increase. Nothing alarming, however. We don't have inventory figures that give us specific details. We don't always take into account the number of units and number of chairs and furniture and so on. But we can tell you that when it comes to laptops, computers, we are within the limits permitted by the policy. Mr. Deltel. Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation, sir. Do you have any evaluation of average costs for producing a collective agreement in the House of Commons and the costs that have been incurred for that locally by MPs in their constituencies? Their analysis has been carried out. I can allow the printing head of service tell you about that. I know that we can provide this information in future to you. Yes, indeed. We have just finalized that analysis, and we will send you the analysis in the week to come, as Dan suggested was possible, but the comparison with outside suppliers compared to the requests that we, for service internal, that we made internally. I'm sorry, it's just difficult for me with the figures here in French. 427 requests internally and 269 requests externally from outside. Then but we'll send you the analysis. Thank you, and thank you for your French, madam.
Merci.
Thank you.
Si je peux demander.
Any other questions? Perhaps I could put a question about the analysis. Will you also be measuring the amount of time on the private sector in compared to the government services, the amount of time put in? Yes, thank you for the question. We have added to the analysis the costs comparing internal to external, as well as the time to complete the production. And we have other information as well regarding the different levels of service available across the country. So we found that depending on the region, service was at a different level. So the analysis includes all those elements. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Mr. Julian. Briefly, in the same line of thought, I'd like to know when we'll get this report, because we will be receiving, we will have to carry out mailings as members at the beginning of the year, especially as we struggle through this second wave of the pandemic. So we'd like to know whether we can use local printers, local print services. That could make a difference. Moreover, we will need to mail to our constituents. Patrice, thank you, Chair. Our aim is to send you the result of our analysis in the weeks to come. But then, based on Mr. Richards' question and the concerns I've heard, I will add that we also intend, as quickly as possible, to send to members of the Board of Internal Economy a submission, written submission for external services. Madame de Bellefeuille, my observations on this. First, I would like to congratulate the print service personnel, given that they are respecting their standards, being that each member's office is well informed from the beginning of the process until the actual mailing of their send out. There are a certain number of days or week. They give you a deadline. And I have, since the beginning of the pandemic, used them, and the printing service always respected its own standards. That's a good thing to keep in mind. Part of the delay is imputable to the circumscription teams or on the Hill, for example. That can be 3 weeks between the outset and the actual mailing of a process. That may not be fast enough for some, but anyway, they are respecting their own standards. The advantage of using a local printer, well, you're supporting local businesses. That's already a good thing, and you are able to control the process, including the number of days involved. I can tell you that varies depending on where you are, and it's certainly not the same across all of Quebec, and I imagine there's quite a bit of variance across Canada. But I sent out 45,000 printed copies within 5 days, and it was the same quality as what I would have been able to do from the house services, but in a shorter time. I am looking forward to seeing the analysis. I'm always a little concerned about the possibility that we might privatize our printing, and if so, what will we be doing with our printing staff if we turn all this over to our ridings? Another matter, the print service does guarantee uniform quality. We have specific formats, there are graphic, templates, and there are all the mailing standards and time standards that I've mentioned. And so all MPs are equal before the printing service, if I can put it that way. The 300 and some MPs go through the same door, receive the same service, and walk out the same door. Coverage, privately, some regions, it's excellent, and others, less so. Will we be providing ourselves with a service that's unequal? Some people are in cities, much better services available. Others will have less services available in their riding, so we'll stick to the house services. So I look forward to reading what you have to say to ensure that we support a fair approach and that takes into account as well the taxpayer's ability to pay. So I would like to know as well as whether it costs the taxpayer more if we allow for printing by private services, or, whether it's a good idea for the taxpayer to stick with the house services. So those are the things I will be looking at when we debate this matter. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Very relevant to remind us that the work carried out here in the House of Commons certainly respect all the elements that Madame Bellefeuille has just pointed out. Equality has never been forgotten. It's always an issue. A number of members use local producers, local businesses, local purchasing. That's good. And then there's the time issue. There remain some of us who prefer to use the house, though. And if some are using private printers, then perhaps it wouldn't take as long to get things done out of the house. If, let's say, 50% of MPs might wish to use the house services, and would that make it easier to get things done quickly if it weren't 100% of them? Let's say down from 2 weeks to 1 week or 10 days, who knows? It would be good to have that. So we will continue in camera. 5 minutes, no, 3 minutes to switch over. Let's take 3 minutes then, ladies and gentlemen, and we will be back. Thank you so much.